Before exploring Marilyn Manson's third album, Mechanical Animals, and the events that led up to it, including the aftermath of the release of Antichrist Superstar, I want to take the opportunity to do a closer look at Portrait of an American Family, going into more intimate detail about the themes and the lyrics of the album, what it meant to me, and so on. I'll probably do the same thing with Antichrist Superstar after I release the third episode of Fundamentally Loathsome, and thus, I'd like to make a series out of this. We'll call it Marilyn Manson Deep Dive. Yeah, not very clever, but descriptive. The idea for Fundamentally Loathsome came to me from trying to create an album review of Portrait of an American Family after being inspired by watching a lot of Rob Ager videos about analyzing subtext and symbolism in movies. What I discovered was that it would be impossible to do a full in-depth analysis of the album while also providing all of the necessary context for understanding it, because if I tried to do that, there'd be some strange pacing issues and it wouldn't come together very well. For that reason, I decided to scrap the idea of making a series of Marilyn Manson album reviews and instead turn it into a comprehensive Marilyn Manson career retrospective. Now, this was a good idea, but it left a lot more subtle or peripheral elements on the table yet to be talked about. My Antichrist Superstar video ended up being much longer and more in-depth about the lyrics and themes of the album than my Portrait of an American Family video, which glossed over most of the actual album due to those pacing issues. However, even my Antichrist Superstar video still left some things unsaid, and even though I think it did a good job of providing the important context and interpretation necessary for appreciating Antichrist Superstar, I still think there's more to be said that simply couldn't be said within that energetic, properly paced, talking to the camera format. That's the reason why I'm not showing my face in this video. In fact, I'm reading the words I'm saying line for line directly from my script because I want these videos to be much more precise and contemplative. There are other YouTubers who can read a script while talking at a camera, but I don't really like the idea of making a video like that. If I'm going to be in front of the camera, I want things to feel spontaneous, even if that means being somewhat ineloquent. If I try to read something on camera, my attention is divided between performing and reading, and I'm not a very good reader at all. So I guess this is me going back to that initial idea of making a Rob Ager-style review of Portrait of an American Family, except now I'm liberated by the fact that I've already explained all the context and done all the fun, goofy edits and cuts to clips in my retrospective episode, so now I can just relax a bit and talk about the album in a more unstructured, introspective way, and with less humor and more genuine earnestness. First, I want to stress the fact that Portrait of an American Family is every bit as good as the trilogy of albums that followed it, which Manson called his triptych. These are Antichrist Superstar, Mechanical Animals, and Hollywood. The triptych tends to be the most praised, beloved, and valued set of Marilyn Manson albums, and for good reason. The albums in the triptych are more ambitious than anything else he's ever done. Their themes are beautifully illustrated with complex but cohesive motifs and symbologies, and they each contained a breathtaking arrangement of sounds, music videos, and album art. The triptych is Marilyn Manson's best work, no doubt about it. But in my opinion, the triptych can be best understood when taken in context with the albums that bookend it. Portrait of an American Family and The Golden Age of Grotesque. These 5 albums put together make up the early period of Marilyn Manson, and each one of them has its own proper identity as a work of performance art that expands to include the entire breadth of Manson's career and public life during the period in which he released the album. In this early period, the album was not the art. The album was the focal point of the art. It was the centerpiece that tied all of the art together and defined it. But it was only the main element of the piece. The Portrait of an American Family era was a big work of performance art, and the Mechanical Animals era was a big work of performance art. Manson has said in the past that his entire life is a work of performance art, and that is very true. I mean, he even says in The Golden Age of Grotesque on a song called Saint, You said I tasted famous, so I drew you a heart. But now I'm not an artist, I'm a fucking work of art. Now, I'm not sure this is exactly what he was referring to with this line, but bear with me, because even so, this line does summarize the point I'm trying to make. Now, the key difference between Manson's former period and his latter period is that the latter albums are just albums. Some of them are very good albums, but they are in essence just albums. They are collections of songs. They do not express an overflowing font of creative brilliance like his early work, and they're not here to be the commercial vehicle of a bigger and broader artistic idea. And I say this as someone who doesn't even like the Golden Age of Grotesque. In fact, I'd go even so far as to say it is a bad album, even though I do like some of the songs at the beginning of the track list. Even still, if you take the Golden Age of Grotesque in context with Manson's changing artistic trajectory, his philosophical leanings, and his aesthetic interests, and then analyze it in conjunction with his other projects at the time, like his art exhibition, you can see that the Golden Age of Grotesque was far more than an album. It was an attempt to find inspiration in the degenerate artists of the Weimar Republic during a time of increasing political turmoil and artistic uncertainty in Manson's own life, and to resurrect an older, more whimsical spirit of entertainment, embracing the ugly and the grotesque in a modern world gripped by ugliness and grotesque fears that were all too real and shocking. It was supposed to be the start of a new art movement.
This record is a new era. You know, it's not just about the music or the album cover, the videos or the art or any of that. It's about bringing in a new era where we care about style and fashion and decadence and degeneracy and excel in our vulgarity and celebrate all these depraved, bright young things around me.
So, when looking at Portrait of an American Family, I often hear it dismissed somewhat by some fans, even if they're not intending to insult the album in any way. They'll refer to it as quaint, or rough, or raw, or sounding like a demo, or an example of Marilyn Manson just trying to get their footing while preparing for the masterpiece that would be Antichrist Superstar. Many people who say such things are fans of the album and say them affectionately, so these are not meant to be insulting remarks. However, they're also very wrong, because Portrait of an American Family is not quaint or rough. It does not sound like a demo at all, and in fact, it sounds like a very highly produced and expertly produced album that Trent Reznor and Marilyn Manson clearly worked very hard on. And while yes, it's less ambitious than the triptych, it is incorrect to say that it is not as good as the triptych. It is a perfect album in its own right. I think what makes it appear quaint to some fans is how juvenile it is, but the juvenility is not a mark against it. It's a perfectly legitimate and furthermore inextricable part of the album's identity. The album isn't any less intelligent for being juvenile, and lyrics like "Along came a choo-choo, knocked my monkey cuckoo, and now my monkey is dead," while on the surface might seem like pure silliness, are actually a lot deeper than you might expect. On Mechanical Animals and Hollywood, Manson identifies himself with Christ-like figures such as Jesus, John the Baptist, and John F. Kennedy. But on Portrait of an American Family and Antichrist Superstar, he identifies himself more with the devil. Really, a lot of the same ideas that Manson explores on Antichrist Superstar are also shown on Portrait of an American Family. So that portrait is kind of like Antichrist Superstar for kids, in a way. In Antichrist Superstar, he weaves together an idea of the devil as the manifestation of his true will, created in the crucible of his scars and anguish. It's a sort of Nietzschean character, an iconoclastic Superman, and the concept is really defined by the idea of changing and becoming, of metamorphosis. The destruction of the world, the destruction of old idols, the rejuvenation of the human spirit, and its opposite, the minute of decay. Portrait of an American Family, by contrast, presents a more humorous and static view of the devil, a version of the devil as seen through the eyes of a child, or like Mephistopheles in the legend of Faust. In my fundamentally loathsome episode, I said he was inspired by the Cat in the Hat, Willy Wonka, the Child Catcher, and the Great Hoodoo, but there are even more versions of this kind of character that pop up in lots of different stories, such as the Witch from Hansel and Gretel, the Sea Witch from The Little Mermaid, Rumpelstiltskin, and the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The devil is not the protagonist of the story, as in Antichrist Superstar, but he's not necessarily a villain either. Rather, he's an eternal force of nature to be bargained with, a morally ambivalent character who stands at the crossroads of choice. Much of the biblical book of Proverbs is written in a way that imitates a parent or teacher instructing a child, and so it carries a juvenile character, much like Portrait of an American Family, and so I find this section quite illustrative. This is Proverbs chapter 4, verse 10 through 19. Hear, my child, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom, I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction, do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of wickedness, and do not walk in the way of evildoers. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence, but the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what they stumble over. I'm also reminded of the old Scottish ballad called Thomas the Rhymer. It's about a fictionalized version of Thomas of Earlston, who was a medieval poet and reputed prophet, who, according to legend, predicted many historical events. In the song, the Queen of Elfland comes to meet him, dressed in a green gown astride a white horse decked out in silver bells. At first, Thomas mistakes her for the Queen of Heaven, until he is corrected, and she whisks him away until they reach the very edge of the life-giving earth, and are faced with a vast desert before them. In the version of the song that I'm familiar with, recorded by Steel Eye Span on their album Now We Are Six, the Queen of Elfland presents Thomas the Rhymer with 3 paths through the desert. She says, "Don't you see yon narrow, narrow road, so thick beset with thorns and briars? That is the road to righteousness, though after it but few inquire. Don't you see yon broad, broad road that lies across the lily leven? That is the road to wickedness, though some call it the road to heaven. Don't you see yon bonny, bonny road that lies across the ferny brae? That is the road to fair Elfland, where you and I this night must go." In the original Scots dialect, the last word would have been pronounced gay, so it would have rhymed. But anyway, the idea here is that the path to righteousness is hard and painful, while the path to wickedness is very easy and often mistaken for righteousness. But she takes Thomas down the path to fair Elfland, which is the path of beauty, eschewing both righteousness and wickedness in favor of such gorgeousness and gorgiosity made flesh. The path of the poet. At least that's how I interpret it. I think that gets to Marilyn Manson's insistence on moral ambiguity and embracing the moral gray area and the path of the artist as his truth, and imploring other people to examine this paradigm for themselves. The devil in Portrait of an American Family, who I will henceforth refer to as the trickster magician, stands at the desert's edge, at the crossroads of life. And he beckons us to travel down the easy road to wickedness by tempting us with all his delightful baubles and trinkets, sugar plums and lollipops for all.
And all free today.
While some children might completely fall for this trap and end up rotting in hell, like Jeremy and Jemima, or the 4 children who were ground up in the machinery of Willy Wonka's sadistic chocolate factory, there is a way out of this mire of tooth decay and depravity. The road to fair Elfland, the road of balance and true perception. This is the road that the devil actually wants us to go down, but it is a road that's only reserved for the most intelligent and creative minds, the people who reject doctrine and forge their own definitions of truth and morality. Thus, the trickster magician is very similar to the Antichrist Superstar. He leads the weak to their own destruction by tempting them with goodies, much like how the Antichrist Superstar leads people to their own destruction by allowing them to indulge their worst instincts of hero worship and blind faith. He takes so much joy in watching people destroy themselves, and enjoys it as a kind of sadistic comedy, because he is removed from the paradigm of good and evil, and instead views the world from a paradigm of strength and weakness, or self-actualization and sickly dependence. These really are the same character, just viewed at different stages in life. During childhood, we are completely dependent on our parents, and we think of our parents not so much as human beings, but more as gods. Parents can be feared, loved, or both. And parents, like gods, seem to prefer having a mixture of the two. In any case, they want to be respected, and both fear and love show a kind of respect. Children, as small as they are, as soft as they are, and as stupid as they are, enjoy simple delights. Their simple taste palates enjoy simple sweet candy. They love bright, simple colors and simple stories with very bombastic motifs that are easy to understand. But adults can enjoy such things too. The only difference is that adults have bigger brains and more experience of life, which affords them more intelligence and discernment, and so they desire a greater challenge from their delights. If a food has an acquired taste, they will value that taste more sublimely, considering the effort it took to learn how to appreciate it. They desire more subtlety and nuance in their stories, and more challenging forms of stimulation, which thus frequently makes them bored and or depressed, especially in our modern world where we're much less connected to our environment and much more skeptical of it as well. In adulthood, many people realize the devil inside of them. They become Lucifer because they have lost their enchantment with the heavenly realm. In fact, some children develop this way early on, especially if they are raised in bad households. And in general, this transition seems to happen during a person's teenage years. They'll get more into dark or gothic forms of expression. They'll start to feel the sting of mental illness or heartbreak for the first time. And they'll start questioning the established order, rebelling against their gods, the man and woman who raised them. Thus, Antichrist Superstar touches on that teenage and adult experience of identification with the devil as protagonist. But Portrait of an American Family represents the devil the way a child would see him, as a dark or inverted pedagogue, a corrupt but charismatic version of Mommy and Daddy. While Mommy and Daddy send us to bed at 8 o'clock and make us eat vegetables and do our homework, the trickster magician says, "To hell with all that," and gives us all the candy we want, lets us stay up as late as we want, and no homework, and no chores.
I do have one rule. That there are no rules!
But what we find is that too much of a good thing can become a bad thing, and thus we realize the insidious trap we have caught ourselves in. Because children are so dependent on their parents, they'll cry out to Mommy and Daddy, longing for that authority and structure they never truly appreciated, until being hit with the real consequences of their sinful desires.
Please, I don't want to be alone anymore. Let me out of here.
Quiet! You boys have had your fun. Now pay for it!
It's only those who don't rely on other people spoon-feeding them the truth who make it out alive. The children who learn to navigate difficult situations through hardship and acquire their own wisdom. So with that in mind, the trickster magician isn't just trying to hurt people. I mean, don't get me wrong, if stupid children fall into his trap, he's elated to watch them squirm. However, he's equally elated to see them find their way out, because he enjoys both halves of the story. He is a truly cosmic being who sees the world as his own little toy chest, a sandbox for him to play out the drama of life on unsuspecting pawns. And that's the perspective from which I see Portrait of an American Family. It analyzes the American family and all of its quirks and oddities from a position of apathy towards the question of good and evil, playfully pointing out how good is actually evil and evil is actually good, mocking our silly assumptions and turning our world upside down to show us how topsy-turvy everything really is when judged on that simplistic level. He instead invites us to look at the American family through his point of view, seeing the dichotomy of power and weakness as the fundamental engine of the human experience. The three songs that represent the trickster magician most thoroughly are Organ Grinder, Dope Hat, and Misery Machine. And so those are the three songs that I'm going to analyze in this video. Really, he shows up in all the songs on this album, but these are the three that represent him the best. As I said in Fundamentally Loathsome, the title of Organ Grinder refers to street organ players with dancing monkeys, and there's a symbolic connection between the idea of that and what Marilyn Manson does. He's portraying himself as a carnival amusement, like something you'd find on Pleasure Island in Pinocchio. The idea being that the phrase organ grinder conjures up a fearsome image of something that could grind up your organs when it is in actuality just a musical performer. Here, he revels in the idea of being feared by parents and loved by children. The CD booklet shows next to the lyrics of the song a bunch of drawings of candy on the left, with a syringe, a bottle of pills, and some sort of mosquito or fly on the right. Here, Manson is making the explicit connection between candy and drugs, which he was so often prone to do during this period. Both represent the forbidden fruit, whatever you are not supposed to have but are still tempted by. The song opens with the sound of a street organ, overlaid with what I believe to be a heavily distorted sample of the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And we'll get a much clearer sample of him later in the song. The lyrics begin, "I am the face of piss and shit and sugar." Well, that's quite foul, isn't it? But the idea seems to be that he is hated by parents and loved by children. He goes on, "I do a crooked little dance with my funny little monkey. What I want is just your children. I hate what I have become to escape what I hated being." Okay, that's an interesting line. I hate what I have become to escape what I hated being. This points to something Manson has said in various places, although I can't remember exactly where. He has said that he hated being Brian Warner. He hated being the person he once was. And this is a concept we see clearly on Antichrist Superstar with the worm, who represents Manson in his larval stage, before he became an anti-hero. He hated being weak and insecure, and so to escape this, he became Marilyn Manson. He embodied the idea of the trickster magician on stage and turned himself into an agent of chaos. However, this kind of life wasn't really great either, and there's an element there of being repulsed by what he has turned into, even though he only became it to escape what he also hated. It came with the trappings of hedonism, which he wrote about on Dope Hat and Misery Machine. It reminds me of what he wrote in The Long Hard Road Out of Hell, describing going to his cousin Chad's wedding and saying that he hated the idea of staying in Canton, Ohio and becoming a regular person, and yet his life was no better. There had to be something else. He goes on, Calliopenis envy from your daddy. A calliope is an instrument which is also called a steam organ. It's in the same genre of street music contraption as a street organ. So the idea here is that the dad in this situation is actually mad at him because he's jealous of him. He wishes he could be as cool as the organ grinder, and he is jealous that his kids are more fond of the organ grinder than of him. Then he says, "You're not gonna hear what he don't want to hear. What I say disgusts him." Here's the idea of the father preventing his children from hearing messages that disturb him. In the case of Marilyn Manson, it would be messages criticizing religion and promoting individuality. Thus, the trickster magician is not only luring children into a world of indulgence of the flesh, he is also luring them into indulgence of the self, of the mind. He is giving them new perspectives that they aren't allowed to hear, but perspectives which are alluring for their beautiful satanic quality. The fact that they not only make sense, but they're also subversive and rebellious. Then he says he wants to be me, and that scares him. Again, getting to this idea of jealousy, but also the idea that the fact that he wants to be like the organ grinder is disturbing for this father. That he himself is secretly drawn to the organ grinder's satanic charms, and he secretly wants to be rebellious like him, but he can't because he's an adult with social obligations, and he takes his religion seriously, so the fear of hell prevents him from sympathizing with the devil, and the need to set a good example for his children forces him to be antagonistic. Then Manson repeats the line about the monkey, but with one extra addition, saying, "Let's do a funny little dance with my funny little monkey, the Black Keys." If anybody knows what the line about the Black Keys means, then let me know. I did a Google search on it, and I couldn't find anything other than a band called the Black Keys, but that's obviously not what he's referring to. I assumed it was some sort of a song that was played using only the black keys of the piano, but I couldn't find any corroboration on that. Then we get to the chorus where he says, "Here is my real head. Here is my real head. I wear this fucking mask because you cannot handle me. Here is my real head." Very interesting. This gets to the basic idea of what a persona is. The word persona comes from Carl Jung, who used the idea of the theater masks worn in ancient Greek plays as a metaphor for describing the way everybody walks around wearing a kind of mask. They present themselves a certain way to a certain person and another way to another person, but they often never really present their true selves to anybody. The true self is always hidden behind a mask. So the idea of the Marilyn Manson persona is what's really being talked about in this song. Perhaps Marilyn Manson is Brian Warner unmasked. It is the dark, deranged aspect that has always been hidden in there, but he always covered it up because nobody could handle it. A lot of people are under the impression that Marilyn Manson is just a persona, just a mask that Brian takes off at the end of the day. But this isn't really true. It was true for Alice Cooper, but not for Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson is Marilyn Manson around the clock. Although it is important to recognize that Marilyn Manson is a persona as well, so perhaps this line is getting to something a little bit deeper. A hidden side of Manson that is masked by both the Brian Warner persona and the Marilyn Manson persona. I think we get some more hints about this on Dope Hat.
The children love the show, but they fail to see the
The idea of unmasking also reminds me of the horror trope of unmasking the villain to reveal his real face. This is used in so many movies and shows like Scooby-Doo, and my favorite example, The Phantom of the Opera. The Phantom of the Opera has a bit of an organ grinder theme running through it as well. The opera house setting is analogous to the dark carnival setting of Organ Grinder. It's a stage on which people perform music to entertain the masses, like what Manson does. Except underneath the opera house are the old Paris catacombs, which hide its most spooky and shameful secrets, like the Phantom himself, the mad, murdering, deformed man who has a gift for music and a beautiful, angelic voice. The Angel of Music. There's a lot of parallels between the Phantom of the Opera and Marilyn Manson. There's this idea of somebody using music to lure an innocent into his grasp, as well as the concept of Manson's Antichrist, as he says on Smells Like Children, "I am the all-American Antichrist. I was made in America, and America hates me for what I am. I am your shit. You should be ashamed of what you have eaten." And this is also said in the inscription on the back of the Portrait of an American Family CD booklet. "You spoon-fed us Saturday morning mouthfuls of maggots and lies disguised in your sugary breakfast cereals. The plates you made us clean were filled with your fears. These things have hardened in our soft, pink bellies. We are what you have made us. We have grown up watching your television. We are a symptom of your Christian America, the biggest Satan of all. This is your world in which we grow, and we will grow to hate you." These words actually connect closely to the lyrics on Wrapped in Plastic, and I'll cover that song in a future episode. But it connects to the idea of the Antichrist Superstar in that the Antichrist Superstar is America's collective suicide. It is the idea that America planted the seeds of its own destruction by creating a culture that rejects its children at birth and sends them down the road to destruction. Hence the line from Man That You Fear, "Spread me open, sticking to my pointy ribs, are all your infants in abortion cribs," as well as the line in Kinderfeld, "Because your lies have watered me, I have become the strongest weed." So, bringing it back to the Phantom of the Opera, the reason the Phantom is a murdering psychopath lurking in the Paris catacombs like a ghost is because that's what he has been reduced to by the society he was born into. His real name is Eric, and he was born with a deformity so hideous that he was completely rejected by society. And when society rejects you, you reject society and become a monster. The very same idea can be seen in Brian's transformation into Marilyn Manson. He wasn't treated any differently than other kids of his social group or generation, but rather he was perceptive enough to notice that the whole system he was raised in was designed to reject who he really was on the inside, and to force him into a mold of a useful idiot. And so he decided to rebel against that system and make himself into the embodiment of all of America's fears, the ghost haunting America's opera house, the world of entertainment. The next verse in Organ Grinder starts, "They try to blink me, not to think me, don't want to bring me out." So here we have the idea of Manson as the devil being brought out in people's lives. This idea that if we indulge the devil at all by thinking about him, or considering his message in any way, he will infect our lives with wickedness. This again gets back to the passage in Proverbs where it says, "Do not enter the path of wickedness, and do not walk in the way of evildoers." This fear of wickedness as some sort of contagion really demonstrates how wickedness is inherent in the human experience. If we weren't wicked people on the inside, then we wouldn't fear wickedness. We wouldn't shun all thoughts of evil because we would have the confidence to know that they cannot infect our minds. He then says, "I am the rotten teeth. My fists are lined with suckers." Here we get the idea of candy causing tooth decay, showing the harmful consequences of indulgence, and the image of his fists being lined with suckers comes from the child catcher having lollipops between his fingers, But there also could be a double meaning of suckers referring to dupes or children who fall into his snare. And then we get this fascinating bit where he says, "My prison skin's an eyesore mirror sketchpad. I am your son, your dad, your fag. I am your fad." So this seems to be talking about his persona and the way it's viewed by different people. He calls it his prison skin, which again indicates that he feels somehow trapped in this persona, that it's not really him, but it's something that he's been pushed into to escape what he hated being. He says it could be an eyesore, something that's purely repulsive, but it could also be a mirror, something that shows people parts of themselves that they didn't know were there, something that acts as a reflection of society. This idea is central to the concept of Marilyn Manson, as he is quick to point out that he is essentially no different from anyone else, and in fact, on one of the pages of the CD booklet we can see the words, "I am you." He is showing us the parts of ourselves that we keep hidden from the rest of the world. And then there's the idea of the sketchpad. This means that his persona is something on which other people can draw their own pictures. In other words, he is a blank slate that other people can put their own projections, worries, and fears onto, either as a scapegoat or as an icon. And this is reinforced with the lines, "I am your son, your dad, your fag, I am your fad." He is anything you want him to be. His persona exists to spark some kind of reaction, either positive or negative. You can love him or you can hate him, but at the end of the day, he means something to you. And whatever that something is will be determined by your life experience, how you identify, and what you're afraid of. Overall, Organ Grinder is the anthem of the trickster magician, and from there we can move on to Dope Hat.
Will perform a feat of prestidigitation.
Prestidigitation. That's a tongue twister. Here it's heard as spoken by Charles Nelson Riley, portraying the evil magician Hoodoo in the old 70s children's television show Lidsville.
How's that for a topper?
I can only assume Hoodoo is a portmanteau of Houdini and Voodoo.
Power of voodoo. You do. What? My me is the babe.
By the way, David Bowie as the Goblin King in Labyrinth is another example of the trickster magician. Here we see Willy Wonka's boat heading down the Chocolate River into a tunnel shaped like an animatronic Charles Manson. Inside the tunnel, we can see that the Chocolate River has turned into something more resembling a blood vessel, as the band are playing to a group of children, while Oompa Loompas row them down a bizarre, psychedelic river of blood, symbolizing psychoactive drugs flowing through an addict's bloodstream. I really wish there were an HD version of this video, because this video needs to be shown in high definition in order to properly absorb its beauty. Just like the real Willy Wonka tunnel scene, it shows a clip of a chicken getting its head cut off, although this time it's on a kitchen cutting board, which is pretty funny.
This is kind of strange.
Yeah, strange, Charlie, but it's fun.
Eyes feature prominently in a lot of the imagery floating around the tunnel, and that makes sense since there are a lot of references to eyes in the song. Let me go through the lyrics and we'll see what they mean. As I said in my Fundamentally Loathsome video, Dope Hat is a song that uses stage magic as a metaphor for drug addiction. The magician's magic hat, which allows him to perform tricks that dazzle his audience of children, is really the one in control, and it is dominating the magician by filling him with a dark magic. The crowd doesn't see the pain that the magician is going through, and they playfully clap and cheer for him. But occasionally, they'll get a glimpse of his true pain, and it frightens them. The really interesting thing about this song is that every verse has a matching set of lyrics, and there are 3 verses. The structure of these verses is nearly identical. We get an opening line about the narrator who is doing some kind of action that has a double meaning, which can either reference using his hat for magic tricks, or engaging in some sort of drug fiend behavior. In the first verse, he says, "I peek into the hole." This could be about looking into the hole of the hat and then showing the audience that it's empty so that they're amazed when he magically pulls a rabbit out of it. But it also could be about poking a needle into his bloodstream. In the second verse, he says, "I scratch around the brim." This one is in reference to the brim of his hat, but it also conjures up the image of a drug fiend frantically searching for tiny bits of meth that he might have dropped on the ground, which is something that meth addicts are prone to do. Also, many drug users get very itchy and are constantly scratching themselves for some reason. Then in the third verse, he says, "My bag is in the hat. It's filled with this and that." The bag could be his bag of tricks, or it could be a bag of drugs and drug paraphernalia. So that's the first section of the verse. The second section of the verse describes him undergoing some sort of mind-altering effect, either of a drug or of the dark magic that is consuming him. In the first verse, he says, "I struggle for control." In the second verse, he says, "I let my mind give in." And in the third verse, he says, "My vision's getting fat," which is a lovely little phrase because there's no existing idiom in English about someone's vision getting fat. But the meaning still seems pretty clear. I've always thought of it as his vision going fuzzy, like he's losing his grip on reality, but it also could have something to do with the idiom of your eyes being bigger than your stomach, which is something he cleverly references in Misery Machine with the line, "The objects may be larger than they appear in the mirror," which is a hedonistic corruption of the phrase written on the rear view mirrors of cars, "The objects may be closer than they appear in the mirror." Then in the third section of the verse, he describes the audience's reaction to his magic tricks, each verse containing a line about eyes. In the second verse, he says, "The crowd begins to grin, but they seem to scream when darkness fills my eyes." In the first verse, he says, "The children love the show, but they fail to see the darkness in my eyes." The idea of darkness filling his eyes could be about the magic curse, or it could literally be a reference to pupil dilation, which is known to happen with certain drugs such as LSD. In the third verse, he says, "They will bite the hand if it is slower than the quickness of their scrutinizing eyes." Here we get the idea of biting the hand that feeds. Manson is entertaining these people by performing for them, but once he starts to show the true anguish he's been feeling, the audience turns on him. Once his sleight of hand and prestidigitation stops being quick enough for their scrutinizing eyes, they become embittered toward him. Then there's also sneaked into the third verse an extra little bit that breaks the structure a little bit, where he says, "The rabbit's just a monkey in disguise. Stars and pills and needles dance before our eyes." And that's something that I already explained in my fundamentally loathsome video, the idea of the monkey referring to the idiom of having a monkey on your back, and thus the rabbit's just a monkey in disguise is about how the stage magic and the magic tricks and the beautiful illusions for the audience are actually disguising a much darker reality. And we see that represented in the video with this image, which I find very amusing. In the chorus, he says, "Fail to see the tragic, turn it into magic. My big top tricks will always make you happy, but we all know the hat is wearing me." And at the end, he says, "Chicanery will always make you happy.
This chicanery? He's done worse.
But we all know the hat is wearing me." All of this could have a deeper meaning connected with the concept of trying to fit in and maintain your regular existence, putting on a show for the people around you while being hopelessly addicted to drugs. Eventually, the cracks begin to show, and as they keep getting wider, the people in your life will start to take notice. Or perhaps it's about Manson himself performing in front of an audience, feeling the pressure to hype himself up in every performance by snorting cocaine. There's several directions you could take this one. As it relates to the trickster magician, here we see the twofold nature of indulgence as represented by drugs. Yes, drugs can give you magic powers in a way. They can give you wit, energy, charisma, and happiness. They can even expand your perception of reality. But there's also a cost. You have to be mindful of slipping into addiction, because that can have tremendously deleterious effects on your mind and your body. It is for the discerning mind and the strong-willed man to be cautious about how he uses these magic powers, and the devil doesn't coddle anybody or tell them what to do. He presents these things on an open platter and invites people to partake to their liking. It is up to the individual to be intelligent enough and willful enough to decide his own limits. The last song I'll talk about today is Misery Machine. Before I talk about the actual song, I'd like to point out this symbol drawn on the left of the CD booklet. Does anybody know what that is? To me, it looks like some sort of occult sigil, but since I know very little about the occult, I can't say what it is. At first, I thought it could be the symbol for Aleister Crowley's Thelema religion. However, I looked it up and it doesn't look anything like it. Misery Machine is a song about a car driving really fast to get to the Abbey of Thelema, which was a little house in Sicily where Aleister Crowley practiced his magic occult religion with his friends. The central tenet of Thelema was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Thelema was a religion focused on harnessing one's true will. Here's what Wikipedia has to say about it. According to Crowley, every individual has a true will, to be distinguished from the ordinary wants and desires of the ego. The true will is essentially one's calling and purpose in life. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, for Crowley refers not to hedonism, fulfilling everyday desires, but to acting in a response to that calling. According to Lon Milo Duquette, a Thelemite is anyone who bases their actions on striving to discover and accomplish their true will. When a person does their true will, it is like an orbit, their niche in the universal order, and the universe assists them. But the magician knows that the pure will of every man and woman is already in perfect harmony with the divine will. In fact, they are one and the same. In order for the individual to be able to follow their true will, the everyday self's socially instilled inhibitions may have to be overcome via deconditioning. Crowley believed that in order to discover the true will, one had to free the desires of the subconscious mind from the control of the conscious mind, especially the restrictions placed on sexual expression, which he associated with the power of divine creation. He identified the true will of each individual with the holy guardian angel, a daemon unique to each individual. The spiritual quest to find what you are meant to do and do it is known in Thelema as the Great Work. So here we can see a definite distinction between the true will as defined by Crowley and the idea of hedonism. However, Crowley was also a proponent of a certain kind of hedonism in his own right, and the concepts are not utterly dissimilar from each other even though they are separate, because just as discovering the true will requires an abandonment of the conscious psychic control over the unconscious, so does the adoption of hedonism. Misery Machine combines both of these ideas into one song. It begins, "The man in the front got a sinister grin, careen down highway 666. We want to go crush the slow, as the pitchfork bends, the needles grow." Fantastic imagery here. So we have a lunatic driving a car down Highway 666. He's not stopping to let anyone pass, instead just bulldozing over everyone in his path. As the pitchfork bends, the needles grow makes reference to the devil's pitchfork and brings to mind the idea of a fork in the road that has bends in it. The needles can refer to the tines of the ends of the pitchfork, or of course to syringe needles. This is another song with reference to drugs, so all put together we have the idea of the devil's pitchfork representing a fork in the road that could lead down the path of drugs and self-destruction. Then we get the chorus. My arms are wheels, my legs are wheels, my blood is pavement. We're gonna ride to the Abbey of Thelema, to the Abbey of Thelema. Blood is pavement. Amazing imagery from an amazing songwriter. My arms are wheels, my legs are wheels, my blood is pavement is one of those lines that just sticks with me. I want to hear it over and over, just like the rabbit's just a monkey in disguise from Dope Hat. What these lines do is create a parallel between the car and the driver, sort of fusing them into one thing. The driver's arms are now the front wheels of the car, and his legs are the back wheels. He's going so fast down the road to sin that his flesh is scraping against the asphalt road, creating a trail of blood, hence the phrase, my blood is pavement. Next verse, grill in front is my sinister grin, the bugs in my teeth make me sick, sick, sick. So now we're getting a mirror of the lines from the first verse. However, this time the driver and the car are one and the same. They have completely fused with each other, so that his grin is now the grill in the front of the car.
I don't mean to be nosy, but do you have chrome teeth?
I do, yeah. I'm going for this Jaguar limousine look.
Yeah, well, you're most of the way there.
And now the bugs that always splatter against the grill of a fast-moving car are getting into his actual mouth, making him sick. His body is in utter disrepair. He is truly a misery machine. This song is clearly allegorical for the dangers of hedonism. Aleister Crowley wrote a book about his experiences with drugs called Diary of a Drug Fiend, which was a title reused by Manson on Smells Like Children, where the remix of Dope Hat is titled Diary of a Dope Fiend. I think Marilyn Manson could relate to Crowley's experience with drugs because what he writes about it in The Long Hard Road Out of Hell clearly mirrors Crowley's experience. Crowley loved drugs, but he hated drug addiction, and he experimented with drugs sometimes in attempt to form an addiction just to prove to himself that he could break it through force of his true will. Of course, it didn't prove so easy. He often pretended he wasn't addicted to drugs in order to save face. Here's a passage from The Long Hard Road Out of Hell. There is a stereotype among people who have never gotten high that anyone who has ever done drugs, no matter what that drug is an addict. The truth is that addiction has little to do with what drugs you use or how often you use them. There are other factors, like the extent to which you let them run your life, and the ability to function normally without them. I make no secret of my drug use, but at the same time, I have nothing but utter contempt for anyone who is addicted to drugs. It is the people who abuse drugs that make the people who use them look bad. Here are a few simple rules to help you determine whether you are a user or an abuser of cocaine, pot, and other substances. Consider yourself an addict if... And then he goes on to list 27 different comical reasons why you could be considered a drug addict. And then he admits that he himself breaks a bunch of these rules, so essentially he's admitting that he's a drug addict, and therefore he finds himself contemptible for that charge. We then get a line in the song where Manson says, "When you ride, you're ridden," which I take to mean the same idea as, "But we all know the hat is wearing me" from Dope Hat. This idea that you might think you're in control of yourself until one day you wake up and realize you're not in control, that this thing you have attached yourself to is now compelling you. From there, we get the memorable sudden silence, followed by the slowed down sample of Beep Beep by the Playmates. This is a 1950s novelty song about racing someone on the street in a Cadillac.
Beep, 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 beep. His horn went beep, beep, beep.
The narrator spends the whole song bigging up his own car and how fast it is and says, "A Cadillac is not a car to scorn." And so the punchline is that the whole time the other guy was stuck on the second gear. It's a pretty dumb song, but it fits well in here, and the strange, slow beat of the song formed the basis for this awesome, Black Sabbath-esque breakdown in the middle where he says, "I am fueled by filth and fury. Do what I will hurry there." I like the alliteration on fueled by filth and fury, and again, the idea of fuel relates him to being a car. As this song relates to the devil, well, of course there's the drug and hedonism stuff we've already covered, and Aleister Crowley's religion was certainly satanic, but also Aleister, like Manson, identified himself as the Antichrist. When he was a child, I guess he was so unruly that his mother used to call him the Beast. This was a title that Aleister wore with pride. Actually, Aleister wasn't even his real name. He was born as Alexander, and his parents called him Alec, but he hated the sound of that and wanted something that sounded more distinguished without being as pretentious as Alexander. When he grew up, he started calling himself the Beast 666. Which is a clear reference to the Antichrist in the Book of Revelation, which you can learn about by watching my Antichrist Superstar episode of Fundamentally Loathsome. So there you have it. That's basically all I wanted to say about the devil as he relates to Portrait of an American Family, and I got in there a more in-depth analysis of 3 of the songs. I'll keep updating this series with analyses of more of the songs and themes in Portrait of an American Family, as we have 9 other songs to cover. So stay tuned for that stuff, and stay tuned for the next episode of Fundamentally Loathsome, which should come out toward the end of the year, possibly a bit into the next year. We'll see. The main hurdle is I'm working on a video about English Hill figures, and I'll have to get that one done before I begin on Fundamentally Loathsome, but until then, enjoy the stuff I put out in the meantime, and stay interested in learning, thinking, philosophy, esotericism, art, all that good stuff. There's so much out there to explore, and it'd be a pity to limit yourself.